seems my attempts to kill you have only made you stronger.
Welcome, friends, new and old. We're back this week talking about Frasier, the 2023 revival, continuation, whatever you want to call it. We are now at the season finale, hopefully not the series finale. Plus, it's a Christmas episode and the one that has that returning character that's been teased since before it even came out. But before we get into it, spoilers do lie ahead, so take this as your last chance to get out. On with the show, you've been warned. Episode 10, like I said, season finale entitled Reindeer Games. And before we get into the ins and outs of what happened in this episode, I just want to start out with that returning character. Roz is back in the show, but that is also the biggest, I think, downside to this episode. And I'm not going to blame the episode in and of itself, because I think they did a fine job in the story they wanted to tell. I want to blame the promotion and the marketing and all the behind the scenes stuff that went into this push before the series even aired a single episode, letting us know that, well, Lilith and of course Roz would be returning this season. And because they teased it right up front, we knew it was going to happen. So the way this episode was entirely structured around the fact that Freddy was getting this mysterious surprise gift for Frasier.
Had an idea for a cool gift for you. Something could bring you back to those days.
If it's a lazy boy or a Jack Russell, don't bother.
It was even teased and hinted at a couple of times during the show. What is this surprise gift going to be for Frasier? What's going to get him out of the doldrums and get him back into that Christmas spirit? If you were following along, you knew it would be Roz. Now, a lot of people out there probably don't actually follow these things online, but I have to imagine going back to the show down the line, that's going to be a little bit underwhelming as well. Similar to how the Office series finale had that big mysterious Michael cameo surprise that they didn't hint at ahead of time. That worked well at the time upon first watch, but going back to it, all you can really think is, why wasn't he in this episode more? It doesn't make sense that he would only show up in this one isolated spot. Similar to this episode, she did have a little bit more interaction with the main cast very quickly at the end, but almost entirely was her scene just her and Frasier sitting at the bar and having a conversation. For some reason, I don't know how, Roz has de-aged over the time that she's been off the show. She looks better and younger and more beautiful than she ever did in the original series.
You look like crap.
And that's not to knock her or anything like that, but just how his time completely stayed away from her, I'll never know. That was wonderful returning character, but it was spoiled by the initial marketing and all that stuff. So how did I find the episode itself? Well, I'm coming at it from a couple of different angles. It's a Christmas episode. I find that for my purposes, Christmas episodes can be hit or miss, but for the most part, the Frasier ones in the past have been mostly hits. There's been a couple that were just tangentially Christmas, but a lot of them were some of the more heartfelt and, wonderful Christmas episodes. A couple of them obviously were the Freddy episodes, so that makes sense. And there was always that wonderful back and forth between Frasier and Martin about the Christmas decorations, which kind of spilled over into this episode. So going into it, we had some high expectations, or at least I found myself having high expectations. And similar to that, this was also a pseudo dinner party type of episode, something else that was quintessential to the earlier run of Frasier. So combining these two things with a returning Frasier character really had these high expectations, and especially since this is the episode that the series could potentially be going out on if it doesn't get picked up or renewed in the future. I have to say, though, that while I think it was a good episode, I enjoyed it for the most part from start to finish, I don't think it really hit those heights of any of the previous entries. And I know that's an unfair comparison, so I'm trying not to actually compare it to what came before, but it's kind of hard to when it was calling back to a lot of those earlier Christmas adventures and a lot of those earlier dinner party adventures, not just like referentially, but directly calling them out by saying, oh, one time we had a dead seal, one time we had a corpse, one time a bed fell through the ceiling, although I don't know if they actually referenced that one, but that's one that always stuck out to me. So directly calling these out to the point where Frasier even texted and talked to Niles on the phone.
Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but the Christmas party is a big hit. Staring at a fabulous Christmas goose, eating as we speak.
It was kind of hanging a lantern on and calling forth those memories of those original dinner parties, and I don't think this one really held up to scrutiny as far as those went. I liked it. It worked for what it was, but it just didn't have enough going on to really fill out an entire dinner party episode like they did in the past. But that's the point of this episode. That wasn't the entirety of it. That was just a small component, and I think that may be part of the downside. They really should have gone full out and done a full episode on a dinner party type of episode, but trying to couple it with these other things left it kind of a little bit hollow. And similar, the Christmas themed elements, while they were festive enough, they felt like the type of thing that would happen, especially that little early scene with Frasier taking out the decorations, at least a couple of them dancing Santa, that weird tinsely Rudolph wreath that used to hang on the front door. That was a very poignant and emotional callback, especially considering this is both in universe and I guess for the audience as well, the first Christmas without Martin. And that really does play into the episode overall. Couple that with the other storyline going on of Freddy's friend and Eve's husband who died, and this is the first Christmas they're without them. There's a lot of loss going on here, and I like how that was played up at the end when Frasier was feeling abandoned by his son, who's going through all of this stuff on his own, to have that little reunion with Roz where she kind of calls him out.
Damn it, Frasier. Wow. I haven't said that in a long time. That feels good.
I like that that was called out. That is the type of thing Frasier would do, and I liked all of that. I also really liked the little subplot going on between David and Alan of doing the little reindeer games, which I guess is what they entitled this after. Going through the party and trying to convince people to naturally bring up in conversation the names of the 9 reindeers, and then inevitably turning that into the 12 days of Christmas. I really did think that was a fun premise, and it was a good use of keeping Alan and David in the storyline, even when they weren't pivotal to the overall family dynamic that was going on for the rest of them. And speaking of family dynamic, I know this isn't plausible, and it was actually set up in the prior episode a little bit, but it would have been nice had Lilith been at least mentioned or invited to this party. I know they mentioned, I'll take Thanksgiving, you take Christmas, but to have Frasier try to throw this last-minute party to kind of keep himself company and get over the doldrums, I just think it would have been a little nice to have that inclusion in there, at least a little reference to it, but I digress. That in no way took away from the episode. That's just the type of thing that's going to come up in the show, especially since Frasier and Freddy are now living together in the same city as Lilith. So it does make a little less sense to have her completely uninvolved in situations like these, but that's the nature of the show, that's the nature of her recurring status, and that's the nature of their relationship, so I'm not going to ding it too much. I also haven't really touched upon the other minor subplot of Olivia and Moose hooking up a la a Hallmark Christmas movie. Not entirely certain if that's going to play out down the line, if that's going to be a recurring romance, if they're going to be a couple in the future, or if it was just a fun, festive thing that's never going to come up. But I do feel that so far in the show, Olivia hasn't really been given all that much to do. Now, of course, a couple other characters are still falling into that same category, but if that's the case and they're trying to build her up to have more outside of her Harvard job for the next season, I do kind of like that, because while she is underutilized, I would very much love to see more of her because I like her when she is actually used. So here we are. We find ourselves at the end of the 10-episode revived series, the revived season. Are we going to get more, or is this just a 10-episode glimpse, a window into the future of Frasier, and is just going to fade away into history, never to be seen and remembered again? I personally think that while there were many stumbles in this season, there were some highlights, and there were some genuinely fun episodes. While it never reached those grand heights of the original Frasier, I don't think it's necessarily fair to compare it to that, especially since it's an all-new setting, all new character interactions, all new writing staff for the most part, so it definitely has to earn its own kind of identity, and the only way you're going to get good character interactions by these new people is giving them time to develop. That's like cutting off the original Frasier at 10 episodes. Sure, a lot of those are probably thought of as classics now, but that's in hindsight after running for so long. If this show is allowed to develop and build over the next few years, it gets a couple of 100 episodes, which it never will, let's be fair, but let's say it gets 50 episodes or something. These early episodes will be instrumental in showing the development, and they'll probably be looked at more fondly once the show has its own identity and goes out in some sort of blaze of glory on its own. Taking a small step back, I actually forgot to mention that Roz brought up Alice in this episode. I really liked that, and I do think potentially down the line that Alice could become a character in the show. I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, but it would make sense if they want to bring in a more legacy character and have ties and connections to Roz, keeping making her a recurring character in the show as well. I don't know if that was trying to set that up, but it was interesting that Alice was the only real backstory to Roz's life between where we left it and where we picked it up here. There was no mention of what she's doing for a career, whether or not she's with somebody, although it sounded like she's not, considering she wanted to go to a party full of hot firefighters, but I digress once again. What did you think of this episode? Do you think it went out on top? Is this a classic Christmas episode for you? Did you enjoy the return of Roz, or do you think it just fell on its face and failed miserably in every aspect? Whatever you think, leave all your thoughts down below. Like, share, subscribe, do all those YouTube things. But until next time...
Merry Christmas!